Thanks so much. Yeah, so really just kicking things off, I've really only got, 10 or less slides to share, but I want to kind of touch on some basics and some things that I've developed as foundational practices or approaches or philosophies. And one of the first ones, I actually started my career entry level as a volunteer coordinator more than about 25 years ago with Project Open Hand here in San Francisco. We worked closely with Shanti. And in the training on that job, I heard this phrase from a Shanti workshop volunteer engagement trainer that has just stayed with me throughout and inspired my entire career. And it's so simple. So if you remember nothing else from today, but you're welcome to share the slides with everybody, remember this one sentence and always kind of center back to it when you're designing however complex a strategic plan or however simple or even a little post-it note on your computer, that every interaction with a volunteer is an invitation to stay or an invitation to go. And it seemed to come up in the notes of the September meeting that people are aware that volunteer by itself is not a job title. And someone can be in a variety of roles and in a lot of different kinds of relationships with your agency before, during, and after they might be a volunteer. So kind of thinking of this as a more holistic community engagement. And I am going to talk about some specifics of recruitment and marketing and, what kind of tech you are using for record keeping. We'll get into that a little bit and then open everything up for discussion. But I really want to hammer it home that at any given time, someone could be a potential volunteer in one role, a current volunteer, a board member, a fan, someone who follows you on social media, who shares your posts regularly. They could potentially be a future paid staff member. They could be a current or future board member. They could be a current or future donor. So I really want to think of this as like, a fan or a peacock's tail, that someone can have be in and out of a lot of different roles in advocating, supporting, connecting with your agency, and not only as a volunteer, or not to think of people as, well, we have to get warm bodies in here volunteer, but we're talking about our peers and our community members. So every interaction, whether that's them going to the website and having to click through 5 or 6 or 7 things to even find out how to volunteer, that can turn somebody off right away. That could be a barrier. If your website or other recruitment material doesn't have alt text or isn't accessible, or if the roles themselves aren't necessarily accessible, that, there's a lot of ways that people can hear about your organization, but there's also a lot of ways where your organization and recruitment of volunteers gets lost in the noise of our very busy, high-tech, everyday lives. So think about less of the traditional marketing of like a pyramid or a ladder, and think about this more holistically as community engagement. And however someone wants to support or connect with your agency, meet them where they are. So meet people where they are, what they're able to give of their time, of their talent. If they also want to be donors, there's a huge Venn diagram overlap between volunteers and donors typically. And we want to think of any kind of interaction as not transactional in a business sense, but ideally, even if it's for a few minutes of a little fun-sized micro-volunteering opportunity, whatever, or several days, or a few hours, or several months or years with you, that it's transformational both for the volunteer and the organization, and it's of benefit to the community as well. So the cause that someone is volunteering for, that's going to resonate with them on some level, and how that resonates with them depends on how you talk about the role, what they think about the image of your agency, and how easy or difficult it is to go through the process of volunteering, which is going to be kind of a major focus of the few slides that I do have today. So every interaction, an email that isn't returned, a phone call that takes a week to get back, an automated cold sign-up system where they don't really talk to a human until maybe they turn up in person. All of those things count as interactions as much as an in-person conversation or the person answering the phone saying, well, I don't know how to volunteer because they're covering for the front desk and they don't have the information. All of those things can turn people off before they barely even start as potential volunteers. We also want to talk about how the invitation to stay or go ties into talent retention. You know, everybody has a natural kind of life cycle, if you want to call it, with an agency. And sometimes it's they just want to show up for one episodic thing with a corporate group or a community group or just on their own during a holiday season, or they want to have a longer commitment or a more flexible commitment. So again, kind of setting and meeting expectations, designing roles, and how volunteers are the foundation of your organization around what the community is genuinely able to do, and also what the community needs as well as the organizational needs, instead of maybe only thinking about what the organization needs and not the volunteer or the community reflection on that. And this is an interactive experience, so again, I'm just going to go through a few things, you know, in like 15, 20 minutes, and then we'll have the rest of the hour to do discussion. But you can also, please feel free to put any questions or comments or reflections in the chat as well. And I trust that Carla or Andrew can keep track of the chat while I'm pushing, yay, I got the thumbs up from Carla, yay, can keep track of that while we go through all this. But this kind of key to invitation or stay or go, smiles are free, thank yous are free. Every time I've done a volunteer survey as a consultant working with organizations, and also when I worked full-time as my job, like Project Open Hand and San Francisco Zoo and conservation things, Telegraph Hill Neighborhood Center. So I've had kind of a variety of organizations that I've worked with in as my full-time job and as a consultant. That's kind of, this is consistent. So every interaction can be positive or negative. It doesn't mean that you have to be perfect little Miss Mary Sunshine all the time. People, we're human, we have moods and things, but we want to cultivate a sense that we're all in this together, and that kind of gets into not just what the barriers are, but that trust is really the currency of any kind of volunteering or connecting with an agency. So the most common barriers to volunteering, and you might be familiar with a lot of these, but the number one is, of course, financial. We don't have time. I can't spend my free time doing something that doesn't make me money. I have to work, gig economy, 2 or 3 jobs, inflation, the cost of everything is going up. More and more people are unemployed, so they have free time, but they may be utilizing that time to try to find other work. So really the financial barrier is probably the biggest thing that prevents most people from volunteering, or at least volunteering in a very recurring role that might have a bigger time commitment than something that's through an app or is just a drop-in episodic thing. And these kind of roadblocks or barriers to volunteering can occur at different times in different people's lives. So language is another one. If you're only advertising in English to English speakers, but you want Chinese, Mandarin, Cantonese, or Spanish speakers, or Russian speakers, or Vietnamese speakers, that's not going to work just from a pure marketing perspective to only speak in English to an English-speaking audience. Also access, again, how easy is it to find out about your volunteer opportunities? Are they on the website? Are they on the front page of the website? Is there a nice big button or menu choice that says volunteer, and it's an easy drop down, easy to find? And also access to physically trying to get somewhere, the cost of transportation, the cost of parking, the cost of having a car or taking a bus or taking BART or taking public transit, as well as if someone has physical disabilities or is neurodivergent or low vision or deaf or blind. Are there opportunities for them, or are they left out? Is it accessible to get into the building? You may not be able to solve the architecture of an old building here in San Francisco or wherever you are in Massachusetts, old brick buildings. But what you can do is recognize these barriers and who is getting filtered through these barriers. Like identify specifically for the roles that you want more volunteers for, or you want more steady volunteers or better retention. What is getting in the way of that? It could be trust. Has there been any bad news or gossip about the agency? Typically, one of the best recruitment tools or methods of all time is still word of mouth. Someone having an excellent, meaningful experience that really like resonates in their heart, and they're going to tell friends and family about it or bring people in if they can to also volunteer or join the organization. But if there's no trust, or if trust has been broken, especially in the early years of the start of the COVID pandemic, a lot of organizations just shut down with little or no communication to volunteers, and a lot of that trust still hasn't been rebuilt in certain areas. Also, just again, shifting new priorities. So maybe it's not financial, but is someone having to do more child care, more parental or elder care? Is their health been affected during the continuing pandemic? More and more people have long COVID. More and more people have to take care of others in their family or their community as social services are being cut on federal and other levels. So there's a lot of factors going into barriers to volunteering. And we're going to talk specifically about an approach to not just understand, but hopefully get rid of as many of these barriers as possible, or at least reduce the barrier as far as someone hoping to join your organization, but maybe getting frustrated at a lack of communication or a lack of clarity, or they feel bait and switched, or what they signed up for isn't what is happening, and keeping that clear. So about 10-ish years ago, I developed the system that I call the 3 C's of happy volunteers. And we're going to define happy not as, again, like all puppies and rainbows and kittens and goodies all the time, but just being content, satisfied, feeling valued, feeling heard, feeling a sense of belonging, feeling a sense of welcome in the organization, and that someone's confident in their work. And an easy way to think about this is that comfort, convenience, and connection. And I have, whole workshops and webinars just on this topic, but to touch on this kind of approach or philosophy today is, again, this can be ideally woven into a strategic plan that centers volunteer efforts and activities in supporting the strategic goals or milestones or core parts of the mission and the cause. But you can think of it in pretty simple terms too, again, like another little Post-it note on your desk. So under comfort, we want to think about physical and emotional comfort. So are people comfortable with their task, the training, the temperature? I've worked with a lot of conservation and indoor-outdoor organizations, so that can be literal, but also the emotional temperature. Is it a toxic team? Is it a toxic culture in the organization? Hopefully not, but that's worth understanding and recognizing that may be a turnoff if there's someone who's super grouchy and negative all the time that volunteers need to work with. That's going to not encourage people to stick around. And then just very basic creature comforts. If someone's working remote, then you don't have to worry about tummy or toilet and feeding people. But if they're coming on site to your agency or organization and working in person, then just making it as simple and clear as this refrigerator in the office is for everybody, just put your name on your yogurt. Or this area is everybody does their own work to clean up after themselves in the kitchen and in the bathrooms, or there's a janitor that does this, or here's where the bathrooms are. Those very simple creature comforts can make a big difference in especially someone returning to volunteer in a recurring role over a length of time and kind of keeping that talent around. And then again, convenience. It gets into that financial barrier of time, transportation, and SF Tech Council, technology. So even though you're doing the work of hoping to bridge that digital divide and educate people, how you are putting out your recruitment and just any kind of marketing or messaging around your organization has a lot to do with technology and people having access to it. So you may be hoping to get peer support volunteers that are already good at tutoring technology. And if you have volunteers that are doing that, then you can create some good convenience or accessibility if you do have more remote roles in something that doesn't have to be in person, or something that is maybe more bite-sized that can be done on its own time, on someone's own time, just with certain deadlines and parameters, instead of having to, show up into an office or show up to a certain location every day, and creating those potential time and transportation and cost barriers. And really, again, the currency of connection, the currency of volunteers or supporters, donors, advocates, voters, anyone who wants to be a part of the work that you're doing with your organization or agency, really comes down to that sense of trust. And like I kind of mentioned at the beginning, we're all in this together, so that if everyone is kind of having a grumpy day, or you're a little hangry, you haven't had your lunch break yet, that there's an understanding that, you know what, it's really, really cold today. There's a blizzard outside, and we're going to get through this together. If you can't come in to a shift, who else in the talent pool can you call to support a volunteer who can't make it or is out sick? So kind of having that sense that we have each other's backs is really, really important. And what I found in utilizing this with all different kinds of agencies is that people commit when they know that you're thinking about their comfort, their convenience, and their connection to the cause that they want to be there to support. Anything in the chat yet? It's okay if you don't have it.
Not yet, Dana.
That's
Nothing
good.
yet.
That's fine. Yeah, we're just going to kind of run through this stuff, and then we'll talk about everything. So one of the comments or notes that came up from the September meeting is that some organizations or agencies do not have the budget for dedicated volunteer coordinator or manager or staff. And then it's very often, or too often, I've seen in nonprofits where there's a lot of different people and in different departments that have something to do with volunteers, but no one person is centralized or in charge of it. That's not ideal, but we can still work with that if that's your situation, or if you're a department of one. And how the 3 C's in action and every day come into play is one of my favorite things to do. And I hope this is another takeaway that you go and do after this webinar, is that everybody is a leader of volunteers. Other volunteers, paid staff members, everybody should know the basics of volunteering, the basic requirements. Is there an age requirement? Is there a certification or a driver's license requirement like CPR? Everybody should get the basic requirements of the roles and who to contact for more information if it's not, you yourself. Now, I call this kind of teaching everybody the elevator pitch. If you haven't heard of the elevator pitch, it's if you're stuck in an elevator with somebody for 30 seconds and you want to pitch an idea to them, kind of started as a Hollywood thing of like, I'm going to pitch you my screenplay in 30 seconds. But you can do this with any kind of messaging. And I think about this as 3 words, 30 seconds, or 3 minutes. So if everybody in your agency, if all hands understand 3 words like join our team, help our elders, whatever, like 3 quick, easy, simple marketing call to action, that should be all over your recruitment stuff. Never say need. We're going to touch on that too. And then ideally someone can not just do 3 words or 30 seconds talking about the roles, but hopefully almost everybody can have about a 3-minute conversation about the different kinds of volunteer roles. And if they can't, that's okay. Say, you know what? I don't know the answers to that, but I'll get you in touch with someone who can. But when everybody has that basic information and understanding, and that's not hard to do. It's a quick in-service training with your agency. I can do a webinar for you. There's other people. There's free resources on Idealist and Alive and other websites where you can get free downloads and other recorded webinars to do this as a training. It's not that hard to do. Also, volunteer, not a job title. It's a pay description, not a job title. So what's the specific title of the volunteer role? Is it Digital tutor? Is it, I've worked with a lot of, neighborhood centers and senior centers. Is it food prep? Is it penguin chick cuddler at the zoo? A specific job role that sounds really appealing until you think about the penguins are in cold, damp places all the time. And maybe there's a little more to that than just cuddling penguin chicks. So specific job titles for all roles, for staff and volunteers, is helpful to any organization, and making it really clear what in the role description, what's required of somebody. Again, this can be 3 sentences or it could be a little paragraph blurb, but what's the time commitment? What are they in for? Just give them enough of a picture that's setting and meeting expectations so that people don't feel like they're being set up to fail, or they don't understand, or they weren't sure what they got into. We want to just be as clear and transparent as possible. And then along with that consistent communication, how long does it take to respond to volunteer inquiries? If you have just some part-time staff, or again, you're a department of one or a department of none, you can communicate, please give us up to a week to return your email or call. Just setting that expectation can help someone not get frustrated if they reach out to you and feel like they never hear back. Reddit threads on volunteering are full of people who are trying to volunteer and somehow never hear back from the organizations that they're reaching out to. So that could be a problem that you don't know that you're having, but tweaking the website, tweaking how you do recruitment communication, messaging can make all the difference in the world. Also make it really clear, if not in the description, in the at least first human interaction, email or phone call or interview, if you do in-person interviews, that what are the next steps and the timing of onboarding and training? Is your training accessible and flexible? Does it have to be in person? Does it have to be remote? That also funnels down who's able to do that role. If it has to be, and some things can't be avoided. I've worked a lot with hospitals or, human services and animal services, zoos, where you kind of have to be there in person to do the thing. That's going to have people self-select what fits into their schedule. And my biggest thing that I recommend over anything else, have a written volunteer handbook. Have it be public. Have it be on the website and on the volunteering page so that, again, people can look to details, and it can be a 10-page handbook. It can be a 100-page handbook. It really depends on the work that you're doing. But at the very least, setting out, the basic policies of the agency, what's expected from volunteers in different roles, what they get from the agency for doing those roles, whether it is a letter of recommendation or anything like that they want to ask for on their resume or in career search. But at least frequently asked questions, basic policies, safety stuff, how to do certain roles, if there's certain training things people need to go through, and a code of conduct. And that helps keep everybody, again, understanding what's expected of them. And then it's very clear if someone has a behavioral issue or a misunderstanding, you can go to, it's in this volunteer handbook that we went over in training, or that we provided for you digitally or hard copy, and we should have an understanding of that. And that also cuts down on people just asking the same question over and over again. If it's answered in a written document that's really easy to find and get, then that's maybe 30 less questions you get in a day that are the same thing over and over again. So it kind of saves everybody's time. Recruitment, ta-da! So again, specific calls to action. Join our team. That's the easiest one. You can steal it from me. You get that one for free. I didn't copyright it. Join our team. Cuddle penguin chicks. Help our kids, read. They're like 3 to 5 words, but something that's just like Nike, just do it. Something that's an easy, quick, recognizable call to action that isn't volunteers needed. If I could go through every stock photo of volunteers and remove the word need from all of the graphics and signs, I would, because what need tells people, if you say volunteers needed, that isn't any specific information about what they're going to do. It isn't any specific information about what kind of volunteers or experience or skills or background you're looking for. There isn't a job title. And it also, when you say the word need over and over again, it subconsciously communicates that, this could be a chaotic sinking ship. And nobody wants to join a chaotic sinking ship. Once in a while, you might find someone really codependent who's into that sort of thing, but you can't really count on that for recruitment. So, follow the rule of never say need in your 3-word sentence or in your recruitment, and that actually has a positive psychological effect of, whatever specifics we have about this, okay, then I can look at this recruitment information, this little blurb on your website, in a poster in a library, in a community center, on Idealist, Volunteer Match, Craigslist, whatever, and people have enough information to resonate with it or self-select out of it that they're not going to be interested or available for that. And that, again, saves you and potential volunteers from wasting time with a lot of back and forth trying to figure out that information later on in the process. Marketing 101. Who is your audience? Where are they? Why should they care? So again, Reddit and other social media platforms are full of people who try to volunteer and never hear back. They are full of people who maybe start to volunteer and what they thought they were doing isn't what they end up doing, and they stop for that reason. And they're not having those conversations with the organization. They're having them with strangers on a Reddit thread or a Twitter thread or maybe a LinkedIn conversation. So kind of realizing, do you want to have Mandarin speakers? Do you want to have Cantonese speakers? Do you want to have Spanish speakers? Where are they? And the notes from the September meeting, and thank you for providing those, Andrew and Carla, talked about partnering with community centers, neighborhood centers. Again, I worked back in the day at Telegraph Hill Neighborhood Center, where it was, heavy Cantonese speakers of kids in the neighborhood learning English or being the translators for their family here in San Francisco and North Beach. And why would what is going to resonate with them? Why do you think, and I'm going to put this question into the chat, why do you think people volunteer? We'll put that into the chat. Or you can, I don't know how many are on the call, but maybe we can unmute. But why do you think people volunteer? And let me know if the chat is popping off with that.
I just popped it in there. We'll see, and maybe people can think about why do people why do you volunteer?
Why do you volunteer?
Why do you volunteer?
Yeah.
So we have a few there, Dana. Can you see them? Like, we want to give back to gain professional experience, want to help the community, their friends or volunteers, need something to do with my time, network, do something interesting, could be a rewarding experience. Volunteer hours are needed for students to feel good about it. Yeah. To help others and to meet people. So there's a social element. Yeah.
All of those are correct, and the easiest answer to that is people volunteer because they want to. There's something in the way that you describe the role that resonates with them, and they want to do it. It could be personal history, it could be wanting to be more social, free time, all of those are correct. But it really gets down to if you can get the messaging in front of the best audience to respond to it, that's when recruitment is going to pick up. And if you can work with other languages, I know there was a comment from the September meeting about it's really hard to find, Chinese dialect speakers and Spanish speakers. I ran into that same issue with zoos and museums and other organizations, and we worked closely with in-language local ethnic media, radio stations. You can usually get a free PSA on most radio stations if you're a nonprofit. Huge media marketing tip. You can get a free PSA. You can get some, students, high school or college students who are interested in media production and want to be an influencer or video production or whatever to help you record and do a PSA, or the radio station itself can bring you in. I've done them sometimes myself. I've gone into KCBS and recorded a 30-second PSA for organizations over the years. So beyond your organizational website, beyond Idealist, or what was Volunteer Match is now also Idealist, word of mouth, think about what other community connections you already have or would like to expand into, and focus on the audiences there with specifically targeted marketing for recruitment. And again, have a role description that's really telling it like it is. There is a great toolkit that I helped work on Idealist called Is Everyone Welcome? So I put the link here, and I'll provide it again in a follow-up email if you like. But that has dozens of different tools on volunteer recruitment, understanding and defining retention, questionnaires internally for assessing needs assessment of volunteer work, understanding community, having conversations in community, and it's based on a sense of creating welcoming and belonging, but it also has just a lot of practical stuff, and it's completely free. You can spend 20 or 30 minutes poking around each of the tools. Some of them are text, some of them are tables, some of them are questionnaires or kind of writing exercises for a team or an individual, but that's incredibly helpful. There's a lot of free resources out there that I want to point you to today. And then we want to think about, what is this roadmap? What's this journey map we have with volunteers from their first contact to screening? Do they need a background check? Are you sure they need a background check? Because that can be a barrier to a lot of people if it's not clearly defined that, we're looking for qualified volunteers with or without criminal, these kinds of things in a criminal record are okay. San Francisco actually has a law, a fair chance ordinance in 2018, that employers can't use somebody's criminal record against them in most circumstances. Does your volunteer need to be background checked? Are they working with kids or elders or vulnerable populations or families? Is there a law that they have to be background checked, or can you do a kind of a screening that doesn't exclude so many people in today's society? Onboarding, training, first shift, and this whole road can be one drop-in episodic day. This can all happen in a little bit of a lead up, a first contact. It might be on the website or through an automated form with volunteer management software, or just reaching out to you in email. This road could be stretched out for, again, days, months, weeks, years of someone committing to your cause and organization, or it can be just as short as a drop-in. But at each point in this roadmap, it's a chance to gather information and data. And if you're particularly having trouble with, the recruitment's pretty good, but we're seeing not a lot of retention, and we're seeing high turnover, then you really plug into this journey map or this roadmap and see, where are people falling off? Are they falling off in the screening because of background checks or something else, or a requirement? How much is it costing them? Is it costing them money out of pocket to volunteer beyond getting to and from? Or can they work, do things remotely? If it's doing digital support work for seniors, is that in person? Is that going to their houses? Is it online? That kind of stuff. But take the opportunity not just to have an invitation to stay or go, hopefully stay at each of these points, but there's going to be a certain natural drop off. Like if 100 people apply to volunteer and 10 end up as a volunteer, that's maybe not the percentage you want to succeed and go all the way through, unless you have a very, very rigorous screening system, which you might need to have depending on the populations you're working with. But if you're seeing, more than a 25 or 50% drop off from the beginning of first contact to getting into the first shift, that's something worth looking at, because typically recruitment and retention issues are a surface symptom of something else in the process is tripping somebody up, or it's too much of a barrier, or they're not feeling respected, or they're not getting good communication. And you can take a quick look at just how you're doing record keeping for volunteers in general. And because we're talking about digital services, we all know that databases are garbage in, garbage out. So, what are you using? Are you using paper records or digital records? Do you have dedicated volunteer management software? Do you have a CRM that you use for clients and donors, and you can add volunteers into it? So think about what your record keeping is, and if that needs a tune-up or an update. It doesn't mean that everybody has to go digital or has to purchase software. There's plenty of free or low-cost options to organize volunteer records, but it's essential to have those records be really, really accurate if you want to pull and analyze data and do some data storytelling, especially around the impact of volunteer efforts and work on your mission goals and strategic outcomes. One of the things that I do as a consultant is directly show organizations how to tie volunteer activities into their organization's strategic plan or basic goals or core of the mission or any other metric that you want to line up. You want to have those match, and what that can do is not just say, hey, we had 1,000 new volunteers sign up in 2025, and that meant that 10,000 seniors were able to learn digital skills. So just sometimes saying numbers by themselves, like we have 1,000 volunteers and they did 20,000 hours of work. Number of people, number of hours is just barely the beginning. You want to really tie any kind of volunteer efforts into the specific metrics that your agency is measuring for grants, for any other kind of fundraising or revenue stream. And very importantly, when you get enough data and information, you can use a simple free calculator. Sterling Volunteer has one. I think Galaxy Digital has them. They're all over the internet, and they're all pretty good, but I like Sterling, where return on volunteer investment. And it's a calculator that you plug in some metrics and some numbers from your organization, and you see that. I'd used this calculator with the Los Angeles Zoo a few years ago, working with them, and we realized that if they made that where they were currently without, before they called me up, they made about $8 back for the zoo for every $1 they invested in volunteer engagement, both, paying for staff and outreach and communication, marketing, recruitment. And by the time we were done, that had risen to close to $10 in the things that we set up over a year and a half. And it's not that you want to think about volunteers as, resource to squeeze, but no, these are people, these are community members, but capacity can be amplified. Showing a return on volunteer investment can maybe get you prioritized in a budget item to hire a manager of volunteer services, to get updated software, to get something else. So when you can make the case, both with numbers and with, data storytelling, quantitative and qualitative storytelling, but you have to know where you're starting from. So at least trying to get that first image or snapshot of, okay, what do we have of volunteer record keeping? What do we need to do? What can we do better? And just committing to that intentional and, sometimes short-term or sometimes long-term process of making just some changes here and there to have enough information to accurately report back to leadership, to board, and to the volunteers themselves in the community. Hey, this is the impact you had working with us this year. We should all feel great about that. So, and we'll open it up to questions. This is how you get in touch with me. But let's talk about it.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dana. This is excellent. A lot of ground you covered there. No, I'm going to just say, does anybody have any immediate question or comment that they'd like to address to Dana? I have one while we're waiting, Dana. But
Sure.
As you were talking there were two things you mentioned. One was volunteer is not a position. I'm just curious, how do volunteers like to be referred to? Do they?
Usually their names as human beings. No, but that's a good question because, someone is a volunteer, and that's a different paid description than saying someone is an employee or paid staff. And you can also say, hey, you know what? John over here he's been working on a special GIS mapping project of California wild. This is a real volunteer I had years ago with an agency that he spent 10 years creating a California fire history map that is used now by CAL FIRE, that is in libraries, that has become a huge resource that many other researchers said, that's a really good idea, climate change. And this was, almost 15 years ago before climate change was in the news, but it wasn't quite as urgent as we've been having with severe wildfires on the West Coast and weather events. We'd still had a wildfire season on the West Coast. And so kind of being ahead of his time, and he was retired. He was well into his 80s, but his retirement was taking, his engineering degree. He had a full career, and he was John, and he was there for almost 30 total years with the agency, and they're longer than any executive director, longer than most of the board members, longer than most employees. So kind of understanding that we're all one team, and whether we're paid or unpaid or part-time or full-time, and having that sense, that connection of trust and togetherness automatically, helps encourage respect and empathy and understanding of how volunteers can very, very significantly contribute to the work of an agency, instead of an agency thinking about, we need volunteers and warm bodies in this number to perform this task of free labor. And really, it's a thinking shift. It's a paradigm shift.
We've got a couple here. One is from Sabrina, and she's asking if you have any tips specific to recruiting or working with corporate volunteers, as opposed to kind of like the one-by-one approach where, or word of mouth or, that sort of thing.
Totally. Yeah. And a great thing to do is decide, do you really have the capacity for corporate volunteers, and how big of a group? Years ago, and this actually never came to be, but in the 2010s, I was working with a conservation agency, and Apple decided that they wanted to have a volunteer, like an Earth Day volunteer event for 10,000 people. No one agency has the capacity to host 10,000 volunteers. Maybe you can get 100 agencies that can support, 100 different volunteers. So, figure out what your capacity is to host. Create those relationships as ongoing relationships, not just come in here and paint the same wall over and over again, because people know the difference between busy work and meaningful work. So if you have that capacity, create those relationships with corporate partners. Many of them give grants based on the volunteering hours that their employees do. Apple specifically doesn't do that, but what it does do is match employee gifts up to $10,000 per person. And I'm married to an Apple employee, so I know these things intimately, not just working mostly in Silicon Valley and with a lot of tech companies. But it really gets to be about, again, setting and meeting expectations with the company that you're working with on what kind of an experience their team is going to have, and making sure that it's not taking so many resources to set it up just for this nice big shiny company like Gap or UPS or Disney or whatever, that are known to be very philanthropic, or like Salesforce Foundation, for example. But that it's mutually beneficial, that people are understanding something, they're not just helping their community, but maybe they're making their own social connections. They have that resonance in their heart. And again, I've primarily worked with corporate groups doing trail cleanups, creek cleanups, beach cleanups, conservation things. Around zoos and parks and open space areas. But with neighborhood centers, I've also done corporate groups that were organized in a way that many of them became regularly occurring volunteers after the drop-in. So that's also an opportunity that once you do see them in person, or they're having the opportunity, that's a chance to invite somebody to maybe be more involved if they want to be. It's also fine if they just want to show up once a year and do something for 5 or 6 hours. But it really takes building that relationship, and most importantly, understanding your agency's capacity to host, so that if you get Tim Cook wants to send 10,000 people to you, you can politely decline, or you can choose to scramble for 3 months and try to make it happen and have them cancel anyway, which is kind of what happened in our case.
We've got another comment here. It's like, would love to know how to continue to get volunteers. Said a lot of the volunteers we get are high school students, and once they graduate, they struggle to find more in terms of, do you have any suggestions in that instance?
Sure. And I also say that if you're connecting with people because they have to do like 10 hours per year to graduate for high school voluntold or student volunteers, then
Hmm.
also connect with whatever colleges they're going to. Again, if you're working digitally and trying to educate elders or population on getting through the digital divide or understanding technology better, a lot of that can be done remotely. So if something doesn't have to be done in person and someone's going off to college, is there a special project or a bite-sized version of something that they can do that continues that work? And again, outreach to universities, outreach to faith organizations. The Church of Latter-day Saints does, a component of many faith organizations is that they do community service, and doesn't have to be counted. It doesn't have to be a minimum number of hours like, high school requirements, but, maybe reach out to organizations that are, faith or community based, or neighborhood centers or community centers, and colleges and universities that are most likely the ones that, if you're in San Francisco State, University of San Francisco, through, Catholic charities, things like that. So start to think about what community groups might have that population of volunteers that would be able to commit in a more steady way. And if you're finding that your shifts or volunteer commitments are just nobody can do them anymore, you might have to change with the times and cut that into, that's a 2-hour shift instead of a 6-hour shift. And maybe you get 3 different people that can do it part-time, or some can do it remotely and some can do it online. But it really, all of this gets down to, again, trust, relationship building, setting and meeting expectations so that it's not too much of a strain on you as an agency hosting it, and that the corporate group really feels like this is a meaningful community connection, and we're not just putting on a t-shirt and taking a photo op in some random place this week.
Mm-hmm. We have another question here about retaining volunteers who started volunteering because of community service hours, or like a students or other kinds of things. But then when they're completed their hours, then they're done. How do you convert those to?
You use the 3 C's. So again, like, it could be that kid felt like, that teen or youth felt like, you know what, I had to do my 10 hours and it was fine and I did it, but I don't really resonate with this. It was just something I have to do. And understand that, and you know what, have a good life, go in peace, do what you need to do with your life. But if there is that comfort, convenience, connection, if there's that sense of trust, relationship building, that sense that we're in this together, then even if someone's getting busy going into college, there could be something that they can do, again, very part-time, or at least getting someone to come back, once a year into an episodic thing, or over the summer if they're back home for the summer. I had that with high school interns with various agencies, where they would want to, spend part of their summer volunteering if they would come back home. But these days, where, kids have to have jobs and, might be in the gig economy and having, 2 or 3 Uber, Lyft food delivery jobs to make ends meet, that's just going to be harder to do. But if you are connecting with someone when they're a teenager, that can sometimes turn into, they're a lifelong advocate for you. And also take ideas from them. You might ask, like, hey, good luck in college. If you have any other ideas of how you want to volunteer or support us, and you have a special project, or you meet make some new friends at college and they're interested and they resonate with this mission, get in touch with them. So keep that conversation open, but also don't, you never want to try to grab somebody and make them, like, I'm so against voluntold. Like, I get why it's a thing, but there's this terrible laws in some states coming up in January of 2026, where people, to get basic food benefits, are forced to volunteer to get their food benefits. That is not volunteering, that is forced labor to stay alive and to get food. So meet people where they are, and some kids will be into it and some kids won't be into it, and that's okay. But if you're only relying on high school volunteers, or only one kind of demographic of volunteers, like retired people has been a very common demographic, especially in like hospital work or animal shelter work, if you're trying to pull all of your talent from one little tiny demographic, that's not going to be successful in the long run, because time moves on and people age and move on with their lives, or move on to other priorities in their life. If they're youngins going into adulthood, they're going to, have different priorities than when they were a teenager. But make that genuine connection and build that relationship, and that's going to be the best bet of kind of utilizing the 3 C's to keeping people around. And when all else fails, you can ask them. Do a quick pulse survey. Ask people, how do you feel valued? How do you want to feel heard? Do you have any ideas to improve volunteer onboarding? Put out 3 to 5, maximum of 10 questions, volunteer survey, or exit survey of high school kids, and you might learn some things that are great insights. You might learn some uncomfortable, inconvenient truths, but data is neutral. You want the information to make the best decision and update or adjust something in the program that is not working for somebody coming back. LifeScan is a digital fingerprinting service that's used in the course of doing a background check. So typically background checks are done at a state level or a federal level, with the state, like California Department of Justice, where I am in San Francisco, or a federal background check. But ask yourself if that's really necessary. I've had plenty of volunteers with, who are hospital volunteers, knowing patient data, medical data, who, if they understand, part of their volunteer agreement, if you have a volunteer contract or volunteer agreement, which is another good thing to have in place, that there might be a specific paragraph about confidentiality, and the code of conduct might, in the volunteer handbook, could outline that these are the consequences for breaching confidentiality. So do you really need to background check somebody? Or are you able to trust them with other references or methods? If you're looking for different ways to do background checks, Sterling Volunteers and several other companies often bundle background checks for volunteers, so it's less expensive. And you also should just communicate whether the cost of the background check is out of the volunteer's pocket, which again is a bigger barrier, or whether the agency's covering it. And I've worked with, again, like zoos and museums and conservation agencies where we do have to background check docents because they're going out and they're leading a trail hike in the wilderness with kids and families. So they do legally need a background check. But really, see if background checks are absolutely necessary. And you're welcome to, email me. It's right here on the screen, and I can send you some recommendations or places that do it, where if you need 100 people background check, it's like $5 or $10 per check instead of like $20 to $50 per check. So there are a lot of services that do that, but typically it's done through your local Department of Justice, state or federally, depending on if you're crossing state lines, dealing with minors or potentially vulnerable populations. There might be that legal stipulation. But just make sure you really have to do a background check, because that's going to be a big barrier to people for the cost, and also feeling like making it clear that you don't care about someone's traffic ticket from 5 or 10 years ago, that, maybe you're only looking for specific instances of, credit card fraud or violence, against animals or people. Like, you can be specific in what qualifies or disqualifies from a background check, depending on your local laws. Again, San Francisco has an ordinance to say that you cannot, for employees, not volunteers, but I like to carry this over to volunteers, that you can't turn somebody away just because they have a criminal record. It kind of depends on how long ago it was and the rest of the context.
And Dana, we have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
We have 2.
Okay.
So any recommendations about email blasts, making them more personalized when sending out to large groups of people? This person said they always try to provide all the information they might need for events beforehand, along with post-event surveys.
It's email, and young people don't do email. So again, how are you communicating with volunteers, and is that how they want to be communicated with? So if you have a volunteer management software system, more and more of them these days have text burst features or other kinds of automated communication features, or maybe you're using Constant Contact or whatever, some, client relationship management database marketing thing. But it should be personalized with their first name. Make sure nothing is misspelled. And don't make it so long that people are just going to zone out. But if you're working with an age group, Gen Z or Gen Alpha, sometimes even younger millennials, that just is not doing email really at all, then they're not going to read that thing. And so is there another way that can you text them a link on your website or a special page that has that information, and just make it clear that they're expected to know this information and that they can contact you if they have any questions about it. But sometimes it comes down to, are people even reading emails? And the answer is more and more people are not.